Seahawks Draft Logs, Rob Staten joining us now on the Emerald Queen Casino Sportsbook Hotline. Get a chance to look back at the Falcons and look ahead to Week 15 against a different-looking Colts team here in Seattle. Rob, I'm going to start by looking back first to Atlanta. A slow first half, which was really the only bad news to come from this one before we look at what they did in the second half and what we loved coming from this one. What did you see offensively in that slow first half from Seattle?
Well, I must admit, at half-time, I was a little bit worried because that was the kind of offensive performance that makes you think that there could be a few issues there. The pass protection was really poor. Sam Darnold was playing at the kind of level that would be concerning for any quarterback this close to the playoffs. And the running game wasn't being leaned on. The play calling was unusually going away from that. I look at the interception as a case in point. That's a 3rd and 1, and you've got your quarterback on the move and throwing across his body instead of running the ball there. So everything was kind of worrying. And then just as maybe there was a few, you know, fingernails being chewed at half time and a few furrowed brows that come out after half time and then do that and have that the perfect second half on every side of the ball. So I think by the end of the game, everything is all's well that ends well. But yeah, the first half was a little bit worrying, wasn't it?
Hey, was there anything specific you saw Atlanta doing that you felt kind of messed up the game plan offensively for the Seahawks?
It just looked a little bit like it was similar to last week when the Vikings were putting a lot of pressure, a lot of bodies into the backfield. The pass protection wasn't very good. You know, Charles Cross gave up a sack very early in the game, and it just felt as if there was just not quite the time there, and also that Donald looked a little bit jittery. There were a couple of times where you're thinking there's an open throw there, and he sort of turns that down and holds onto the ball. That was especially the case with Ken Walker being open on that interception. There was a couple of other times when you thought maybe you could set off and run here rather than just sort of sitting in the pocket. But I think you have to give them a lot of credit to come back after a difficult first half. They kept it to 6-6 at halftime when it could easily have been like 10-3, 13-3 to the Falcons, and you having to sort of come from behind there. To keep it at 6-6 and then to just sort of do that, just to blow them away in the second half. I'm currently in the Caribbean, and I bumped into like 3 Seahawks fans later that evening, and all they were talking about is how this was a comfortable win. And everybody had just totally forgotten about what happened in the first half. And it's to the Seahawks' credit, because that could have been a very difficult second half. We've seen trap games for other teams, and other teams have fallen to teams that they should not lose to. The Seahawks have avoided that. They ended up blowing out the Falcons. They did what they had to do. And that was all down to a brilliant second half performance.
A pretty good day overall for the defense. A quiet first half because both defenses were kind of keeping the offenses in check. Emmanwori in particular had a spectacular day. I can't remember a line like this. Actually, I think I saw a stat that it did happen one time before with the Seahawks last year. But a sack, an interception, a blocked field goal, it never happened. Bump tells me it never happened, which is insane. Bump and I yesterday were talking about just some of the gambles that Seattle's made really paying off. And I know that taking Emmanwori in the second, trading up is like a gamble, maybe not the single biggest one they made in the offseason. But is there something to be said for the draft hits that they've had of late, for the decisions that they've made with Mike Macdonald at the helm defensively, just really honing this group in?
Well, it looked as if they've wanted this kind of a player for a while. I suspect that's why they traded for Jamal Adams, is that they kind of wanted somebody who could be a chess piece, that they could move around, that they could have blitzing a lot, they could create pressure, could cover, could make plays, could be an impact player on the second level. And obviously that did not work out with Jamal Adams. And you've got a coach in Mike Macdonald who's taken Kyle Hamilton and turned him into the player that he really should have been. You know, Kyle Hamilton was arguably the best player in his draft class. And the only reason that he didn't go a bit earlier and last to the Ravens was because he didn't run a particularly good 40. But everything about his field awareness, his read and react, his tackling, you know, just there's so many good aspects to Kyle Hamilton's play. And Mike Macdonald took that ball of clay and turned it into one of the better defenders in the NFL. And he's looked at Nick Emmanwori. And the amazing thing about Emmanwori is he could be better than Kyle Hamilton. He could be better than Derwin James, who people will have seen playing the Eagles last night. He's got all of the physical potential to redefine this position, frankly. Like, he is just, we have not seen somebody with his skill set and his impact ability before in the NFL at this position. And that performance on Sunday against the Falcons was just like a big statement. Like, he's got to be in the running now for Defensive Rookie of the Year when he's playing as well as that. And the impact plays, yes, you know, we're all going to focus on that amazing blocked kick. I mean, how he extended his arm to get a block on that was unbelievable. The interception was maybe a little bit fortuitous, but we'll take it as a first interception in his career. But he was just all around the field. It's amazing, really, that I had a look on PFF yesterday, and he only got a 53.2 grade. It makes you wonder what else you have to actually do to get even a decent grade on PFF when that performance on Sunday was only a 53.2. But yeah, he's an unbelievable player. It's a great move for them to sort of trade up and go and get him. They've managed him very, very well, and he's got an exciting future in the NFL.
Saw the Eagles lose last night. The Packers beat the Bears. Obviously, the Seahawks won, and the Rams beat the Arizona Cardinals. It changes week by week for me when I try to evaluate the NFC and who's what and who's the best or whatnot. How do you sort things out after that week?
Yeah, it's really hard to because it's in a way this is kind of what you want the NFL to be. You don't want the NFL just to be all about, okay, you've got these 5 or 6 quarterbacks and they're definitely going to be the contenders and everybody else can make up the numbers. And hey, which of the great quarterbacks has got a running game that can support him or a decent enough defense to go all the way. You don't want it to be just repetitive every single year. And we're looking at a playoff situation now where we might not have Patrick Mahomes in the playoffs. We might not have Lamar Jackson in the playoffs. We're not going to have Joe Burrow in the playoffs. That opens up everything on the AFC side. And then you look at the NFC and it just feels the same. Like the Detroit Lions any given week could blow a team away and look amazing and look like the best team in the NFC. And the following week, they can look pretty average and their defense isn't very good. And they've had so many injuries and they've got offensive linemen talking about retirement this week. So they've got all of their issues. You've got the Green Bay Packers, who, again, can look amazing one week and pretty average the next. You've got all of the NFC East is just it's a weird mess. Like the Cowboys flirted with being really good for a moment, and then they've sort of gone back to how we expected them to be a few weeks ago. Eagles look like a disaster zone, and the media's going to be all on their quarterback for the rest of this week. And it just sort of looks like the Rams and the Seahawks are best placed to make a run here. And it could well be down to those two teams. I hope it is going to be down to those two teams. We've got this meeting coming up between the two in a couple of weeks. I hope the Seahawks can get a win there and get that sort of statement win that they're currently lacking at the moment, a signature win. But it could be that they play each other for a third time. That maybe it will be the NFC Championship game, or it could be the divisional round game, which determines which team is ultimately going to go on to get to the Super Bowl. They look like the most balanced. They look like the best teams at the moment, but as you quite rightly say, Bump, next week you could have a completely different opinion based on what we see. If the Seahawks lose to the Colts, which it's that kind of season, we'll be having a very different conversation. So as long as both teams hold their serve this week, that Seahawks-Rams game is going to be the game of the season in the NFC so far.
I know that we're going to have more of these conversations leading up to that game and especially after, but if we could just kind of tap into it right now, a week ahead, most of what I see ranking the NFC has exactly what we just talked about, where the Rams are ahead of the Seahawks. And while the Seahawks are the second most bet team to win a Super Bowl, and that's great, the Rams are ahead of them. If there is an advantage that you think the Seahawks do have over the Rams, what is it? And what's still keeping that distance with LA ahead?
I think the Seahawks have a better roster. I think man for man, you sort of compare the two rosters. Seattle's is deeper, it is stronger. I think they have more impact players at more positions. The difference between these two teams is simply that experience level. You've got a head coach who's been in the league for a long time now, and Sean McVay, and has won a Super Bowl. You have a quarterback who has also been there and won a Super Bowl, and he's got support from the likes of Davante Adams as well to help steer through that. That's the only difference. The Seahawks, a lot of these Seahawks players have not won a playoff game before, or they've had sort of fleeting experiences. And it's good that Ernest Jones is there and now Cooper Kupp, because they need that little bit of Super Bowl experience to be able to lean on when he gets to the big games. But that for me is just sort of the big difference between the two. It's that extra level of experience. Maybe you could trust Matt Stafford a little bit more because of what he's been through in his career and the great career that he's had in a playoff game. But Seattle's roster is better. The defense is better. It's just whether they can bring all of those parts together and play complete football in these big moments, in these big games, because as we've talked about a lot this year, the Seahawks have got the job done in every single week, apart from the weeks when we've gone, this is a huge NFC game. The Niners in week 1, losing to Tampa Bay in Seattle, losing to the Rams in LA. That's going to be the difference. They've got to prove that they can win those games. The Rams have done that. The Rams have shown they can win the big games, and there's players on that roster and that coaching staff who've won a title. Seattle's got to prove that they can do it now as well.
Hey, going back to the first and second half of Atlanta, what did you see change in the offense? And I asked you about the defense and what Atlanta did to kind of affect the offense. What adjustments did you see in the second half?
I think you're just going to give all the credit to Sam Darnold. He just looked I say, concerningly jittery in that first half. And then in the second half, he just seemed like a picture of composure. It was like the Sam Darnold we have seen when he's been at his best earlier in the season. You think back to that first half against the Washington Commanders when he was pretty much flawless. Like one incompletion or zero incompletions in the entire half and was throwing touchdowns all over the field. It kind of went back to that. All of a sudden, every time he was dropping back, instead of like watching it through your fingers and wondering, is he going to get sacked? Is he going to get hit? The ball was out on time. He was making the right reads. He was making the right decisions. He wasn't risking anything. There were no sort of throws where you're kind of thinking, oh, don't do that. And then they've kind of dropped an interception, or in the case of the first half, got the interception. He just seemed like he was back on track. And when the quarterback is calm, when the quarterback's making the right decisions and he can move the football and he's finding his best player in Jackson Smith-Njigba, everything else will just work off that. And then the running game started to look a little brighter. The pass protection changed completely. And I have to imagine that's down to that calmness, that ability to take a breath at halftime from Sam Darnold and come back in the second half and play a lot better than he did in the first.
I wanted to look more specifically at the offensive line, which actually went a good chunk of the season, Rob, as you know, without getting too much criticism and have still not allowed nearly as many sacks as we're used to seeing. I think it's obvious to a lot of people there's still a bit of a gap between pass pro and run blocking. First, do you see that as maybe a central issue to the run game woes? And secondly, is this line as a whole still good enough, in your opinion, to be perfectly fine, take this team to a Super Bowl?
I think the line is good enough, and I think because the pass pro has typically been better this season, I think it's, as long as the quarterback is clean, you will have a chance to have a playoff run. And I do think it is good enough, and we've seen enough positivity from this offensive line that we don't need to throw the baby out with the bathwater this week and sort of say, well, look at this, and it's been a few weeks now and they've given up some sacks or anything like that. But there are some concerning things to it, that the run game has never quite got to that point where it's. I keep referring back to the Chiefs game in preseason. We've not had even one game where the running game has just felt unstoppable, even against the bad opponents. They've not been able to run like that against the Chiefs, against any of these teams. And then you sort of look at the pass pro a little bit. Look, Charles Cross is a decent player. I don't think he's quite as good as some people make out. Like there's almost this assumption that he needs to be paid like the highest contract amongst left tackles in the NFL. I don't think he's played well enough to warrant that kind of conversation right now. He's a decent player. Abe Lucas is solid. He is not sort of a shutdown right tackle. He's not Lane Johnson or anything. So, you're not talking about a flawless line here. The interior, you've got one rookie, you've got one player who gets a lot of criticism playing at right guard, and then we're going to have to wait and see who is ultimately the centre for the rest of the season. Now Jalen Sundell is coming back. So it's far from a flawless line, but I think collectively they've played together. They've mostly avoided injuries, which has meant that there's not been a load of chopping and changing like we've seen with the Chargers this year. I think that will give them a chance to go into the playoffs and feel like the line can be good enough if other aspects like the running game and the quarterback and the defense are playing at their very best.
And what do you make of the season Cooper Kupp is having?
I think he's doing what he needed to do. I don't think anybody really, if we're being honest, expected Cooper Kupp to have 1,000 yards and 10 touchdowns. His role is about leadership, leading by example, being a consummate professional, sort of being somebody who all of the other players, not just in the receiver room, but everybody can look up to and go, this guy's a winner. If you want to be a winner, if you want to have the kind of success that he's had, dragging himself from where he was at college to being a Super Bowl champion, one of the best receivers of his generation, you need to follow this guy's lead. And, we can kind of we can look at the statistics and go, oh, well, and make a determination as to whether that signing was worth it or not. I think forget the fact playing. Do the same with DeMarcus Lawrence, even though he's been lights out for a number of weeks now. The impact that those two players have had setting the culture is just, it's priceless. Frankly, they could have paid any amount to Lawrence and Cooper Kupp for that. Look at the Washington Commanders. The Commanders have tried to sign veteran players, experienced players, to help them set a culture, and it hasn't worked. And therefore, they're really struggling. And when the injuries have happened and adversities hit, they've fallen apart. Lawrence and Kupp, their impact on this roster and this young roster with not much experience, and you can combine like the Ernest Jones into that as well, and obviously Leonard Williams, their impact in setting this team up for success mentally with their attitude, not just with the talent and the physicality, I think has been so important for Seattle.
I'm going to stay for that for a minute because I'm glad you mentioned Lawrence. I feel like he gets overlooked quite a bit. I think Kupp was just, look, came from a divisional rival. was born in Washington State, went to school here. Obviously, there was just a lot of talk about, but I've kept thinking throughout so many Cowboys games this year, like, man, they could really use DeMarcus Lawrence, who's just been fantastic as kind of a shockingly under the radar move for Seattle, considering he is a big name.
Yeah, I think the best thing for me was when he went to the podium after the game against the Minnesota Vikings, and he had his sort of mic drop moment. Obviously, I won't repeat what he said, but it to me that felt very Cam Chancellor. Like there's the look in his eye, that kind of. He looks like an alpha. He stood there at the podium. To me, he strikes me as somebody who, when he speaks, everybody listens, and he won't sort of come out with a mouthful of words, and he's not going to bore all of his teammates to death. He probably says a few words that will resonate with his teammates, and that will just set the tone for everything in that locker room. And you need players like that. The Seahawks, we can all talk about the young quality that they had in 2013 when they won the Super Bowl, but you also had some very experienced, grizzled veterans who knew what it was all about. No one should ever forget the impact that someone like Red Bryant, for example, had in Seattle 12 years ago. Like that kind of player is just as important as your Nick Emmanworis or your Jackson Smith and Jigbas. You need those kind of core players on your roster. And this is why John Schneider should be executive of the year, because it's the ability to look beyond the injuries with DeMarcus Lawrence. Nobody on the internet on X was like saying, get me DeMarcus Lawrence in the offseason, not just in Seattle, but around the country. Nobody was sort of demanding their team go and sign DeMarcus Lawrence. He'd had some injuries and everything like that. And when the Seahawks signed him, people raised an eyebrow and thought, well, why are they bringing him in? He's an older player. He's had some injuries. Is he quite as good? He has been arguably, I'm struggling to think off the top of my head, who's a better free agent signing in the NFL this year than DeMarcus Lawrence for his impact on and off the field? Like, John Schneider should be executive of the year for a great draft, for signings like that, and Cooper Kupp as well. Just leaders who've been able to set the tone, get the culture that Mike McDonald wants, and set them up to be. They've already got a 10-win season, and there's 4 games left. Like, this could be a 13, 14-win season. The Seahawks have never had a 14-win season. If they win out, they're going to set a record there. If they get to 13 wins, well, when the Seahawks win 13 games, they tend to get to the Super Bowl. So fingers crossed that's going to repeat as well.
He is Seahawks Draft Blog's Rob Staten. Rob, always a pleasure. Thanks for taking the time.
Thanks, Rob.